Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Hackley. I'm an attorney, mother, grandmother, and author of Undercurrent. Thank you for joining me in another episode of the AreYouAnnie podcast, where our goal is to have a conversation about narcissistic abuse and hopefully validate and inspire all of the Annies of the world. Whether you're just beginning to recognize the signs or you're in the midst of breaking free from an abusive relationship or well into your healing journey, this space is for you. You're not alone. Your experiences are real, and we'll explore the truth behind narcissistic abuse, the strength it takes to overcome it, and the resilience that lies within each of you. As a reminder, I'm not a healthcare professional. I'm simply someone who wants to put a spotlight on this often overlooked and misunderstood subject. My perspective comes from what I've witnessed and the experiences that women have shared with me. The goal here isn't to provide therapy, but to open the conversation, because too often women like Annie Black suffer in silence, unsure if what they're experiencing is even real. This space is meant to be a safe space, a place where you can listen, watch, and if you feel comfortable, share your own experiences. Because the more we talk about this, the more we empower others to recognize the truth, to find strength, and to take steps forward and toward healing. You're not alone, and your story matters. In today's episode of Are You Annie, we're diving into the question that many readers have been asking me, and that is, why did Annie Black stay with her abusive husband for so long? This is a question that often arises when discussing narcissistic abuse, and the answer is not at all simple. In Annie Black's case, the decision to leave her husband can be attributed to a complex interplay of cultural expectations, fear of her family's reaction, and the insidious nature of narcissistic abuse, particularly the way it eroded Annie's sense of reality and her self-worth. One way to describe Annie Black's experience is to say she lived in a psychological prison and feared telling anyone what was happening to her. One of the hardest aspects for people who are not familiar with narcissistic abuse is that when someone is trapped in a narcissistic relationship, they completely lose themselves. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the control tactics are often so subtle. The person being abused believes what is happening to them is their own fault. They can't stop trusting their own judgment. They second guess their thoughts, their feelings, and even their memories. In Annie's case, her husband would distort the truth to her, deny past events, or shift blame. And gradually, he convinced Annie that she was the problem. And the longer that Annie endured this, the harder it became to recognize the abuse for what it was, let alone explain it to somebody else. Imagine Annie trying to confide in a family member. She tries to tell her relative, he tells me I'm crazy, that I'm remembering things wrong, that I'm overreacting. Sometimes he's so sweet, and then suddenly he's cold and cruel. Maybe it really is just me. If the person doesn't understand the nature of narcissistic abuse, the reaction is often, "Are you sure you're just not being too sensitive? Marriage is hard. You just have to work through things. You know, he's a great guy. You're so lucky to have him. He doesn't even want you to work. He wants you to stay at home." In these moments, Annie is not only invalidated, but now she's convinced she is the problem. This is why so many victims stay, because when they do try to reach out, they're often met with blame, disbelief, or the encouragement to stay and just fix things. Annie's situation was further complicated by cultural expectations and the fear of rejection. Annie came from a family that did not believe in divorce. In fact, Annie would have been the first in her family to get divorced. Marriage was for life, no matter what. This created another layer of fear. What would her family say? Would they reject her? Would they blame her for the marriage falling apart? Would they refuse to understand the abuse because he never laid a hand on her? Many families, especially those with strong religious or cultural beliefs about marriage, may see divorce as a failure than a means of survival. This pressures women in these situations into staying in a toxic marriage to avoid being ostracized or labeled as ungrateful or dramatic. One of the most difficult aspects of leaving a narcissistic relationship is the fear of the unknown, the paralyzing uncertainty of what life outside of that relationship could possibly look like. When a person has been manipulated and controlled for a prolonged period, the abuser doesn't just dominate their present reality, they systematically destroy their confidence in a future without them. Narcissistic husbands work hard to create dependency in their wives. They chip away at their confidence, isolate them from supportive friends, and make them question their self-worth. Over time, the woman internalizes her abuser's voice as her own, believing the lie that they are incapable of surviving on their own. Some of the most common phrases an abuser uses to instill this fear include, "No one else will ever love you the way I do. You're too weak to make it on your own. You'll never survive without me. If you really love our child, you will not take our child from me." This relentless programming doesn't just make the victim doubt their ability to leave, it makes them afraid of what's outside the relationship. If every ounce of self-worth has been dependent on the abusers validating them, even when that validation is abusive, stepping into the unknown feels terrifying. Often the victim's entire world has been built around the abuser's control. Maybe they weren't allowed to work, or maybe they had no control over finances. Both was the case with Annie Black. And even when the abuse is unbearable, it's still familiar. And sometimes familiarity feels safer than the uncertainty of life beyond it. Escaping a narcissistic relationship isn't just about physically leaving. It's about mentally deprogramming the lies that have been instilled over time. It's about rebuilding self-esteem, restoring trust in one's own judgment, and rediscovering who you were outside of the abuser's relationship. That's why the AreYouAnnie podcast exists, to be a space where women at whatever stage you might be in your relationship, we're here so you can find validation, connection, and encouragement. The journey out of narcissistic abuse is rarely a straight line, but every step is a victory. If you're listening, you're not alone. Someone else has or is going through the same thing you are. Please hit the subscribe button and encourage others to do the same. And remember, you are stronger than you think. I want you to be tenacious and never give up on what's important to you. Thank you so much for listening.